Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the show. IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. He's Vince D'Addario. I'm Sean Stiers. Two of many faces you're going to see on today's show. This is like a Scooby-Doo show or something. There's just like something happening all the time. Well, yeah, they rip off the face, but it's like those meddling kids. There's something going on all the time on this show.
That's true. And I know based on the comments in the section, in the comments section, I'm not Jesse. I'm sorry. I will apologize ahead of time that you're not getting Jesse, and you're not going to get a whiteboard from me. Nope. Now, I can draw up plenty of plays on a whiteboard, but that's just not my thing on this show.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Not the niche that Vince has
used to draw up all kinds of plays for Jesse Stiers to make tackles back in the day.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
But yes, Salty and Joe, Jesse will be here in a little while, and he will be bringing his whiteboard with him. We'll see if he fulfilled the assignment, because I gave him.
Yeah, you did.
This is what we need to be looking at. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
So Jesse will be later, even before Jesse, but after Vince. We've got a guest on the show from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Chad Bishop. Going to be talking to him about Georgia Tech. And of course, there's some question as to whether or not Haynes King, almost left out the N, Haynes King, the man with two last names, will be playing or not.
Oh, no.
He hurt his shoulder against North Carolina last week.
Okay.
And Georgia Tech media actually gets to go to a little bit of practice during the week down there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he got to see a little bit of practice today. And so we'll get his thoughts on what he saw from Haynes King and whether or not he thinks he might be available this Saturday.
Would you like to go to practice every single week if you were a media member?
Because
I know it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Right. The biggest thing that I think that you would take of it, because sounds like it was like the 5-period practice type stuff that they get to see, so that's now at Florida State. And hopefully I'll have Kurt Weiler on here in a few weeks when Notre Dame plays Florida State. I believe Mike Norvell gives them some full practice availabilities during the week, like during the season. I know that they get to basically see everything in the spring and almost everything during fall training camp.
Wow.
I'll ask Kurt just like what their in-season availability is like. If I remember right, the last time I had Kurt on during the season, they were watching some practice during the season. Again, I don't know how much I'd want to watch it. Mostly, I think the biggest thing it would give you is like injuries and stuff like that. Who's out there at the start of practice and those kind of things. So other than that, I don't know how much more you would really glean from in-season practices.
Did you talk about in your interview the fact that the running back for them, Jamal Haynes, and the quarterback, Haynes King, have the same name spelled exactly the same way?
One's a first name, one's a last name. I did not mention that. I mean, we did talk about both of those players, but I didn't mention the Haynes connection.
I find that to be very hilarious, very odd that that's the case. Like, what are the odds that you've got, starting running back, starting quarterback, with the same name, but surname and anyway.
Right. We didn't go that far. YouTube user wants to know if your son has picked a college yet.
Nope, not yet. Still lots of players in the game at this point. And for those of you who don't follow recruiting when it comes to kickers, punters, and snappers, a lot of that stuff starts coming in December-ish, January-ish. That's when the official offers start rolling in.
Okay,
unless you're like the top 5%, of kickers, punters, snappers out there, and he is not in that realm, but probably top quarter. So yeah, that's where we're at. So we're just making some visits, seeing coaches in person, shaking hands, kissing babies.
Glad handing out there.
Yep.
All right. So again, Chad Bishop will talk some Georgia Tech football, Haynes King and Jamal Haynes and all that good stuff coming up in a little bit. And then Jesse after that with whiteboard and
just all kinds of stuff.
Just bustling. We were just bustling. today. Wanted to talk a little bit about the defensive line today. We we mostly talked about secondary yesterday.
Right.
The horrible news that Benjamin Morrison is going to miss the rest of the season with his hip injury. But Marcus Freeman had some interesting comments, I thought, about some of the defensive linemen at his press conference Monday as well, starting with the play, the kind of revitalized, renewed play of the two veterans, Howard Cross and Rylie Mills, and talking about the pressure that they were able to get up the middle against Stanford Saturday.
It's huge. It's huge. Those two played dominant. And, they played well all year. And, but, I think what you saw this game is they got a couple sacks, but it's they got to understand that sacks doesn't always reflect how you play, right? Is that, there can be a narrative out there that you're not playing well because you don't have the stats to back it up. That's not always the case, right? But Saturday, what the case was, they played really well and they had the stats to back it up.
Had the stats to back them up, even though, as we know, stats are for losers. So that's right. I mean, but they had the stats to back it up out there for sure. They combined for 8 tackles, 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, and another quarterback hurry. I mean, it was literally, it was what we were expecting of these two guys all along coming into the season. Now, like you said, when you are an interior defensive lineman, sacks don't always tell the story. There is something to be said for chewing up blocks and letting the linebackers make plays and stuff like that. And I think there's been some of that, but
Not enough.
Me, no, you're right. You're right. Not enough.
Yeah.
To me, though, when the game really changed was when that pressure is like Notre Dame did. It's like they figured out, look, if we get pressure up the middle, like there seemed to be a concerted effort after Stanford's initial touchdown drive on Ashton Daniels. They just made him uncomfortable, and the game really changed after that.
Oh, I completely agree. And again, Marcus Freeman's absolutely right. I mean, they don't have to necessarily get stats and all of those things. And I don't know how much I completely trust Pro Football Focus when it comes to pressures and hurries and, all of those different things. The fact of the matter is I can see it with my own 2 eyes, is the middle of the defensive line causing the quarterback to reestablish his feet, bail out of the pocket, all of those different things. Is the middle of the defensive line causing the quarterback to be uncomfortable? That's the biggest thing. And it was very clear and it was very evident in Saturday's game. And they were able to accumulate the sacks and the, that kind of stuff as well. But this is really the first time that they were consistently affecting the quarterback in a negative way. You know what I mean? Like there were some times they would make a play here or a play there, but it was consistent pressure up the middle and forcing him to not have set feet, to bail out of the pocket, to do all of these different things. And I it was very impressive. That's what we expected to see in the first 5 games that we didn't really see on a consistent basis, but that's what we're going to need to see moving forward as well. That's what we thought we were going to see this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to see a better offensive line from Georgia Tech than what Stanford had last week. Georgia Tech's only given up 1 sack through their first 7 games. So they protect pretty well. Haynes King is part of that with his mobility. But like you look at Ashton Daniels, and I think the key is just that pressure up the middle, because Daniels finished with 42 yards on the ground, knowing this is a dual threat quarterback. 27 of it came on that one run on the first series of the game, that ended up being a touchdown for Stanford. After that, not much there. And again, to me, it just started with what Mills and Cross were able to do by getting, like, no quarterback likes that pressure in his face. And you just saw more times than not, like that pocket collapsed pretty quickly, and he didn't know what to do with it. Now, there's a chance that it might not be Haynes King out there for Georgia Tech. If it's Haynes King, there's a difference, because this is a guy who's been around for 5 years now at this point, whereas the younger guy, Pyron, is much less experienced. And I think that you're going to you make the younger guy panic a lot quicker if you're able to to get that kind of pressure up the middle assertively, the way Notre Dame was able to do against Stanford.
I mean, look, Haynes King is also, obviously very dangerous with his legs. He's very, he's a kid who's been around, like you said, for a while. He's got a lot of starts under his belt. It's a big difference between him and the backup. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to be the difference in the game, because I think Notre Dame is still going to do well against Haynes King. But the keys to victory, so to speak, are going to be different depending on which quarterback is in there. Like Haynes King, you need to control him both with his legs and with his arm. You need to be able to do both. I don't know the backup quarterback all that well and what he's actually good at and what he's not good at, but he'd be starting if he was better than Haynes King, right?
Sure, absolutely.
We can all agree that Haynes King is dangerous with his legs, and so you need to keep him in the pocket, and you need to collapse that pocket and basically do what you did to Daniels against Stanford. I mean, that's the blueprint for a mobile quarterback, right? I mean, just don't let him be mobile, force him to do things that he's not that great at, right? So I feel good about what Notre Dame can do defensively against Georgia Tech. And if they have the backup quarterback in there, then it's just like, okay, it's going to be uphill climb for the rambling wreck of Georgia Tech.
I mean, I think the key is make them as one-dimensional as possible. And Al Golden has done a pretty good job for the most part of being able to do that, like the way they've worked their defense, playing so that you take away the opposing team's strength as much as possible. I mean, like there was no world, other than that first drive where right. Stanford had any kind of success. Again, Georgia Tech is a better team. Just I think on both sides of the ball, they're going to be a better team than Stanford was last week. But if you can get even close to the kind of destruction that Cross and Mills, and we're going to talk about Gabe Rubio here in a second as well. If you can get it even close to that, I think you're going to have a pretty good day against the Yellow Jackets.
Oh, completely agree. And look, they're 5-2. They're no slouch. They lost obviously to Syracuse by 3 points, and they lost to Louisville by 12 points or something like that. So a 2-score game. They're not a slouch, but they've taken care of business in the games that they should be winning, right? I mean, the only game I would say that they won that at the time you thought maybe they shouldn't win was Florida State.
Yeah.
But since then, they beat Georgia State, they beat VMI, they beat Duke, and they beat North Carolina. I mean, and none of those were really all that convincing of a win except for VMI, to be honest with you. So, Notre Dame is the favored team in this game, and they should be. They should beat Georgia Tech on a neutral field. And technically, this is a neutral field, right? Even though it's in the same city as Georgia Tech, but technically
still
it's
not their home
field,
stadium,
right?
Yeah.
Technically, it's a neutral field, and Notre Dame should win, and they should win handily.
I'll be curious to see from a fan standpoint. Obviously, there's not like huge pockets of Notre Dame people in Atlanta, but I will be curious to see with a bigger stadium and sort of that uniqueness, the fact that it is at Mercedes-Benz, in that dome. If you see a pretty good Notre Dame contingency down there in the stands.
I mean, I think you'll see Notre Dame's national presence. You know what I mean? There's going to be a decent chunk of green, I would think, out there. I would think
that there's a greater chance that it's going to be 50-50 because of the fact that you're in a bigger stadium than like you're going to get this, bigger groundswell of Georgia Tech fans.
I think it's a disadvantage for Georgia Tech to be on the road, to be perfectly honest. Now, a disadvantage from an attendance standpoint. It's an advantage if this is a Georgia Tech home game and they're getting all the gate. You know what I mean? Because they don't care where the money's coming from. They'll take the blood money from Notre Dame fans. They don't care. You know what I mean? So they'll be happy in that regard because there's more seats in that stadium, I'm sure. So, but as far as a split, I think a 50-50 split is very, very possible in this game for sure. Because Atlanta is a very kind of centrally located spot. I think a lot of places can get to Atlanta. You know what I mean?
It's the Delta hub, like the airline. It's the Delta hub, So, that airport is friggin' massive. I don't know if you've ever been through there.
I've been there on layovers. I've been there on layovers.
I was going to say, I had a connecting flight coming back from the BCS championship game that year, and I waited just a shade too long to head from, like one gate over to the other. And by the time that I got to the plane that was flying back into South Bend, I was literally the last person on the plane. And the flight attendant was so nice enough to say, well, the last person has finally gotten on the plane, so now we can,
thank you.
Yeah, like
Thank
I was the one, like they were, they were actually holding it up for me, like I was, whatever the gate time, I was still well ahead of when we were supposed to depart and all that kind of stuff. But it takes a while to get there, even with the moving escalators and all that. It takes a while to get around in that airport, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, Gabe Rubio wasn't getting around very well at the start of the season because you might remember he broke a bone in his foot back in training camp, but he was finally able to play for the first time this past Saturday against Stanford.
No, he played right around what we thought, but it's a progression in terms of you get cleared to start running 1 week, you get cleared to start doing football-specific movements. So he was doing football-specific movements, but not in practice. Like this was his first real week where he was actually in practice. And, we knew we were going to use him in a limited role, but he did a great job in that role that we had him in on Saturday.
21 snaps he ended up playing Saturday. So not a huge amount for Gabe Rubio. But I will tell you this, when I looked down, I was like, oh, 97's out there.
Yeah.
Gabe Rubio, like that stood out right away.
It's funny you say that because at one point during the game, I was watching the game and I driving at the same time. And all of a sudden I saw 97 running off the field. I was like, Gabe Rubio's in the game. Okay, let's go. I didn't watch it close enough because I wasn't upon further review this past weekend. So I didn't watch it close enough to see, how he did specifically and what that all looked like. But just having his body, like we talked yesterday about bodies in the DB room, in the corner room, right? Just having his body and his girthy body in the game in the middle of that defense is huge. It's huge for the depth chart. It's huge for the defense. And I'm glad he was able to get out there and get 20 plus snaps in this game.
Yeah, they really need it because of the size, because he's the biggest defensive lineman they have right now.
Yes.
And for him to be able, again, like you talk about eating up blocks, to me, Gabe, again, it's great to have him back right now. And to me, it's really good that he got last week to get some snaps. He'll get some more snaps this week against Georgia Tech. And to me, it's because of the way these two academies are playing right now, Navy and Army, having him for those two games, I think is going to be huge. I wouldn't be shocked if you see more of Rubio in those two games than even Howard Cross, because just the importance of taking away that fullback dive, as the starting point in the option, being able to plug that up and take that away. They're really going to need that against both Navy and Army. So I think it's very important to get Rubio back. And just when you look at some of the ups and downs, especially with the depth of how things have gone on the interior this year, I think he's going to make a lot of impact, I think. Again, and like going back to what Marcus Freeman said, impact doesn't, especially for those interior guys, doesn't necessarily mean stats, but he can make a really big impact just with, just that big rugged body that he's got in there, eating some of that up.
Absolutely. Just like you said, eating it up, not allowing those, offensive linemen to get to the next level, all of those different things. He's going to be key. And I am excited to see what he's able to do, because we all thought that he was going to be an integral part in the depth of that defensive line, and having him back is a huge boost to this defense. There's no two ways about it.
So Marcus Freeman, there's going to be a little bit more Rubio in here, but he was asked, like it was a one question about all three of these guys: Bryce Young, Gabe Rubio, and Josh Burnham. So here's what Freeman said.
Yeah, Bryce has been tremendous. We knew he was a special player when he first got here, but he's developing faster than probably we all thought. He is physically ahead of most people his age, but he plays the game with an effort that is uncommon at times. And so when you put those two things together, he's continuing to learn the game of football. That's why he's performing at a high level. It's great to have Josh Burnham back. When I went back and watched the film, at first he has the interception or fumble, whatever they called it. But he played really well. He's different when he's in there. And the week of practice, I was a little bit cautious because, he's still not putting all his weight on his ankle. But, man, he didn't play that way. He really did a great job. It's great to have him back. Gabriel Rubio, to have him, a guy that's been out all fall camp, all season. He last week was his first true week of practice, and he performed really well for us.
Starting with Bryce Young, Vince, I mean, obviously you've got the lineage there, the son of a Hall of Famer, Bryant Young. Right. But, I remember, I think it was in the spring when we got to talk to him when he was an early enrollee. This is a guy who really didn't start playing organized football till around high school. It was like middle school, high school. He didn't start playing. And I mean, obviously you look at the physical, and again, the fact that, he's Bryant Young's son, but this is a guy who is still relatively early in his football development, and you're already seeing inklings of some pretty great things from him.
Oh, I mean, you hear the cliches all the time, right? He doesn't look like a freshman. He doesn't play like a freshman. I thought Marcus Freeman's comment about his effort level being uncommon, I thought that was a really interesting, phraseology, word salad, whatever you want to call it. I thought that was very interesting, a way to describe a guy who's just better than everybody else who's his age. You know what I mean? And I mean, I remember when he committed to Notre Dame, he was kind of this tall, skinny kid who you knew was going to need some work and was going to need some time, is more of a developmental type of player. And then all of a sudden he goes into his senior year and it's like, oh, okay, this kid has turned a corner.
Right.
And not only did he get just physically bigger, the physical maturity that he got started to match with the motor that was already ingrained in him from his dad and his lineage and all of that. And now you've got a kid who's just, it's a good thing that he's around based on all the injuries that have happened up front, obviously, because I don't think he would necessarily have gotten the amount of snaps that he's getting. He still would have made his way onto the field.
Right. But I mean,
not like this.
The last two games, his snap count has almost doubled. He's gone from 20s in terms of how many snaps per game he's playing to 39 in each of the last two games because of all these injuries. Exactly. And that's even getting Josh Burnham back, obviously. So
I mean, he is just a man child and he's playing like it. And it's a good thing that they wrapped him up as soon as they did in the recruiting process, because he started to blow up towards the, his end of his senior year. And he was obviously already committed to Notre Dame and all of that. But I'm glad they were able to hold on to him, because he is becoming incredibly important to what Notre Dame wants to do on the defensive side of the football.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And then getting Josh Burnham back, I mean, came at the exact right time. And Marcus Freeman talked after the game about it sounds like he was still in a lot of pain. And then, so Freeman was talking about him, everything that he went through, would he play? Would he not be able to play? All this different stuff. And so then when Josh Burnham actually got up there in the post game, I'm like, so where are you from a health standpoint? Are you 80%? Are you 90%? He's like 100%. What I should have said, is that with the adrenaline that flows through you as well? Because that's not what it sounded like when you heard Marcus Freeman talk about, what he went through just to be able to get out there and then to excel once he did get out there.
I mean, look, we have never shied away from our excitement of who Josh Burnham is and what he's able to do and what we think he can do and all of that. And he just made us look like geniuses on Saturday. Really. You know what I mean?
I know.
It was, we've been calling for him to either start or get the majority of the reps or, whatever. And I mean, that was just an amazing play that he made. And he was impactful and effective the entire game. It's just that was the big flash play, obviously, that he made. But again, he's super important to what they want to do.
But I think what goes probably underrated, again, when you look at stats don't tell the entire story for the game, is the way the pass rush, it did to me start with that pressure that Cross and Mills were able to get up the middle. But at the same time, with a quarterback like Ashton Daniels who can take off, think think back to the Florida State game. I think what year would that have been? Like 2020 when what's his name? Not Jordan Love. That's the Packers quarterback. The former Florida State quarterback, the guy that just graduated or left last year.
Oh yeah, gosh.
Why is his name? It's Jordan, right?
Yep.
He kept running because Notre Dame could not contain the
Right.
pocket the right way. The edge rushers weren't just bull rushing. Jordan Travis, thank you. The edge rushers weren't just bull rushing, and we talked about you can't run behind the quarterback. They were doing a perfect job, even when they weren't getting home, to bring him down. They did a perfect, because the sacks came from the guys up the middle. They did a perfect job of their contain and keeping Daniels in the pocket.
He had nowhere to go. I mean, he had absolutely nowhere to go. I mean, he was literally in jail back there, and all he could do was take the sack a few different times. You know what I mean? Because he just had nowhere to go. And that's what you want to do, especially in obvious pass rush situations. You just can't get too far upfield. I mean, we've talked about the fundamentals of a good pass rush, and they stayed home, and they did a really, really good job of not allowing it. And then, again, we talked about this yesterday, but the way that they played that speed option, it hurt them on that first drive. And then they made an adjustment. They played it differently, and boom, turnover. And you can only go to the well so many times against Notre Dame defensively. And once you do once and you get it, it's like, fool me once, shame on me. You know what I mean? Fool me twice. That you're not going to fool Notre Dame twice. It's just not going to happen. And so you have to make sure that one time is not super impactful in a negative way towards Notre Dame, but they're just not going to get fooled twice.
Yeah. I like this comment from Jason. He said, not trying to put the cart before the horse, but a 2025 edge group of Young, Burnham, Logan Thomas, and a healthy Traore sounds nice. And there's a chance Jordan Botelho is going to be back as well.
A good chance, actually.
Yeah.
That he's coming back. But just based on the way he was playing and the film that he's been able to put out.
I mean, it's not official. Marcus Freeman talked about they've talked to him about coming back, but it's not official that he's coming back.
Yeah, this is us talking. I think he needs to come back, and I think there's a conversation that we're going to have eventually about Benjamin Morrison coming back too.
That's going to be an interesting one. I mean, the most interesting one is his health, though.
Yes.
How he recovers. Yeah.
We just don't know what.
And that's what really stinks for him right now is the fact that it is a hip, and people yesterday brought up Bo Jackson, and that. Hopefully it's not that extent, because if it's what Bo Jackson had, then there's no future for Benjamin Morrison, if that's what it is. I'm not a doctor, but based on what Bo Jackson had, that's why his career ended, because of that, like that hip socket deteriorated and was diseased and all that kind of stuff. We have no idea, if it's anywhere close to that. But again, like a hip is any injury is potentially serious.
Sure.
Hip injury is very serious. And, Morrison is just going to have a ton of stuff to weigh from between, what does the physical look like? Can he sell himself to an NFL team? Does he go, would he potentially go so low? Versus there's also still a risk in coming back next year, because there's still the risk of, more injury. So
I think, in his case, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here, but I think in his case, obviously he's got plenty of film that shows that he's an elite player, right? So he doesn't have to worry about that part of it. It's going to be, is he going to be healthy enough to show teams in person that he has recovered from this injury?
Right.
That's the biggest question mark, because if he can't get healthy prior to combines and pro days and, all of that, that whole circuit right before the draft, if he's not healthy by then I think you have to talk about the potential of coming back because of how far he may drop in the draft. He's going to have to prove to,
and he's only got 4 months to recuperate in terms of when the combine starts and all that kind of stuff.
He's going to have to, I think he's going to have to show them that he's physically healthy. He's got plenty of film. That's not a problem. It's, are you healthy? Are you going to be able to come back from this injury?
Salty's good with the Google machine. He said Jackson's injury was to the small artery to the head of the femur. its actual name, that leads to avascular necrosis of the hip joint. It does not happen suddenly.
Well, there it is.
Thank you very
and
much.
Look, we don't know.
I'm salty.
We don't know if Benjamin Morrison's injury was chronic, like if it was happening all year, if it was something that happened in, the Stanford game. Like we literally don't know anything when it comes to this injury. So,
right,
is it a chronic thing? They just decided to shut him down. Was it a playing injury that just happened? What's the surgery? What's the time frame? We don't know any of that stuff. So eventually it'll all come out, and we'll see. We'll see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for Vince's time on the show. One in, one out. He'll be back tomorrow, though.
I'll be back, baby. Don't worry.
Yes, that's right. And probably some Thursday as well.
Yeah, probably.
We'll get the schedule update from Jesse. It sounds like next week is going to be Jesse back full schedule.
It's coming back.
Show. So, all right. Hit the like button. If you're in the chat right now, I saw somebody post a thread on that on the Champions Lounge yesterday. More hitting the like button. And we appreciate people reminding people to hit the like button more because it does help the show. So, Vince, thank you very much. Good stuff. I will talk to you later.
All right. See you, everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. I'm off to a band concert.
Woohoo! Live it up. All right, so Vince is out. Jesse will be in here in a little bit for both rapid fire and the whiteboard. Yeah, you're getting a whiteboard. You're not getting it yet, though, Paulo 27. First, we're going to talk a little Georgia Tech football. We are happy to welcome Chad Bishop to the show from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He, of course, covers Georgia Tech. Chad, thanks for joining us here today.
Well, thanks for having me. It actually probably feels a little bit like South Bend in Atlanta this week. It's in the low 60s and thought about turning my heat on, man. I don't know. You guys are bringing the cold weather down with you.
I tell you what, I guess so. And it's been like 40s and 50s up here already this week. It's like fall really hit us full force over the last week or so.
Right in the face. That's right. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, there's a lot of stuff to get into with Georgia Tech. I did want to start with Brent Key, the head coach. This is his second full season. Of course, he took over as the interim coach when Jeff Collins was fired fairly early in 2022. I'm curious, because we don't see Georgia Tech very often. Was he a popular hire when they ultimately made him the head coach?
Yeah, I think in the moment, for context, Brent Key took over, like you said, early 22 as the interim coach. Former Georgia Tech offensive lineman, bleeds gold and white. I mean, loves Georgia Tech with all his heart. Led Georgia Tech to some wins, in 2002 as interim coach, and the team seemed to rally behind him. There was a social media push for him. But I think on the flip side, right, like anytime a program promotes the interim coach, I feel like oftentimes it ends up not being the right move. I mean, you look like a Dabo Swinney at Clemson, like that's a dream come true for those folks. But more often than not, it's the easy hire. It's the right hire at the time. But as time goes on, it doesn't really play out. I don't think that's been the case with Brent Key. I mean, he has really dug in deep. He's been training for this opportunity his whole life. I think there was thinking that he could have taken over at Central Florida for O'Leary. When O'Leary's time at UCF was done, he didn't get that job, moves on to Alabama to be an assistant under Nick Saban. So he's been training to be a head coach for a long, long time. And this job, was sort of right place, right time. And he's taken it by the reins and really has this program moving in a great direction. 7-6 last year and won a bowl game.
Right.
Sitting at 5-2 here in 2024 with a brutal schedule ahead, but they're looking pretty stout so far in 2024.
Well, like you said, they have improved, and I realized they were, like with Collins, they were coming out of the Paul Johnson option era, like transition, basically transitioning to a modern offense. Is that maybe why it's worked out a little bit better for Collins in the short term, or other reasons, to kind of go along with it? Why do you think it has worked out a little bit better for him, it seems like?
From an outsider's perspective, I think so. I've only been covering Georgia Tech since 2023, so I missed the entire Jeff Collins era. But I think there is something to be said for being the guy that follows the guy, right? And Paul Johnson won a ton of games and championships and bowl games, triple option offense. Now, Jeff Collins did not do himself any favors. He didn't really endear himself to the fan base. And sort of had some cheeky bravado about him that rubbed people the wrong way, and went out and lost a ton of games and lost badly. Lost a game to Notre Dame, 55-0, and lost to Georgia 41-0, and just was not competitive a lot of the times. So I think from that perspective, it wasn't hard for Brent Key to go up because they were pretty down low at the bottom, right? But that being said, Brent Key has clearly changed the culture, given this team an identity, and they're beating good teams. They're beating ranked opponents. They're winning home now. They got to start putting wins back to back to back to back. If they do that, they got a chance to maybe creep in the top 25 and compete for ACC championships.
You mentioned the 5-2 coming into this game, very obviously more than respectable right now. Have they exceeded your expectations to this point?
It's interesting. The Las Vegas win total was 5.5. I think they were picked 9th, I want to say, in the preseason ACC poll. I thought that was a little low. I thought this team had a chance to win 8 games. The problem was the schedule going into the preseason, playing number 10 Florida State, clearly not number 10 anymore.
No.
Playing what they thought would be a ranked North Carolina team, they've kind of fallen off. Nobody expected Duke, to be undefeated when Georgia Tech played them, but they had to play the defending ACC runner-ups in Louisville. They still have to play Georgia. They still have to play Notre Dame. They still have to play Miami. They thought NC State at home on a Thursday night was going to be a really, really tough game. So week in and week out, they've had a real tough schedule. We haven't even mentioned Syracuse, who's been barn burners to this point with Kyle McCord, have been an outstanding football team. So, I thought it would certainly be a struggle for them to get over that 6-7 win mark, but they're trending in the right direction. Lost 2 games by a total of 15 points, 3 on the road at Syracuse and 12 on the road at Louisville. So they're a few plays away from being undefeated. Now, that being said, they miss a field goal in Ireland. They lose to Florida State, and they could, easily be 4-3 or 3-4 at this point. So they're a team that wins close games. They play 60 minutes. They're going to grind it out and drag it out. Likely not going to blow a lot of teams out. Likely not going to get blown out by a lot of teams. And that's where they are right now. But they've found a way to win, and that's the mark of a veteran team, which is what they have this year.
You talk about that win over Florida State, and obviously it looks different now. They're far from a top 10 team, but still, I've got to think, regardless, for Georgia Tech to beat Florida State, that's still got to be really important for them. Anytime you can beat Florida State, especially to start off the season.
Yeah, I think it was, and just the way that they did it, right? Like winning on a last-second kick and fighting some adversity, doing it in a foreign country, with College Game Day there against the defending ACC champions. I mean, there were a lot of eyeballs on that game, and Georgia Tech played its type of football. Like I said, grind it out, play for 60 minutes, play a close game, and win at the end. And I think they knew going in that they had a good chance to win, but I think it was a proving point to show the rest of the ACC and the rest of the country that, Georgia Tech was good in 23, and they're going to be good again in 24. And here's a proving point to say, hey, they can play with almost anybody on their schedule. Again, we thought Florida State would be a lot better than they were, but at the time it was like, man, look at this Georgia Tech team. They have a real chance to do some special things.
Okay, so the $1 million question for this game is, of course, the quarterback, Haynes King. He left last week's game against North Carolina, had a shoulder injury and some conflicting, what exactly, as of right now, is Haynes King's status for this week's game?
My personal opinion is probably doubtful. I think officially from the program is day-to-day. Brent Key was on the local radio on Monday, said he's day-to-day. We talked to him on Tuesday, said the same thing, day-to-day. We were still allowed into practice. We were still allowed to watch him. He was still, in his regular green quarterback jersey, going through quarterback drills, doing the things Haynes King normally does. But he didn't play that entire fourth quarter. His shoulder looked pretty banged up. We don't know what the injury is, whether it's a shoulder, an upper body, or maybe, a rib or whatever the case may be. So I don't know. It's sort of a tough scenario because this is a non-conference game for Georgia Tech. I'm not indicating they would rest a player just because they have conference games coming up, because this is a huge opportunity for them. But Haynes King has he's a bright future. He's a kid that wants to play in the NFL. And you kind of look at the big picture of things and you say, well, if he can miss one game and being completely healthy the rest of the way, is that the gamble, right? Or do you throw him back out there in hopes of beating Notre Dame and maybe he injures it further? So I truly think they're going to take it day by day, see how he practices, see how he feels. it could lead all the way up to kickoff where he just says, I can't do this, right? It's not working, and we got to put the backup in. Now, the good thing for Tech is Zach Pyron, the backup, is not a kid. He's been in the program 3 years. He led this team to a win at Virginia Tech in 2022. He's played a lot of football, especially this year. They call him the touchdown vulture because they get in the red zone, they hand him the ball, and he scores from 3 yards out almost, every time. So he knows the offense. He's not going to come in there scared, especially playing in Atlanta. So they sort of have, I'm not going to say the best of both worlds, but it's not the end of the world if Haynes King doesn't play. They have a solid backup in Zach Pyron.
So I'll come back to Pyron, but I
Yep.
want to go back to what you were talking about, the fact that you got to actually see a little bit of practice. And so was King, when he was throwing, did he look comfortable throwing? Did it look like it was bothering him a lot?
He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't look comfortable. I mean, he
Okay.
just looked like Haynes King. And the portions of practice we get to see, they're not running team drills. They're not airing the ball out. They're not
Sure.
really going 1,000% full speed.
First part, I kind of warm up still. That
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, sort of that stuff. But the fact that he's out there, in uniform with a helmet, I think is a good sign for Georgia Tech. Again, I really think they're going to play this very, very cautiously and take it day by day, practice by practice.
It's curious, like you guys get to actually see in-season practice. Is that
Yep.
is that pretty common?
Yep. Every Tuesday and Wednesday we're allowed in for the first 4 periods of practice. It's not an unwritten rule. It's a pretty strict rule. You can go in there and watch. Just don't leave and say, hey, I saw so-and-so broke his leg, and as long as you don't do that, as a member of the media and tweet pictures of guys who are on crutches or whatever, as long as you're respectful and watch some things, it helps you down the line, right? Like if I were to go to practice on a Tuesday and see a kid in a walking boot, come Saturday, someone says, why isn't so-and-so playing? Well, he's out. I saw him at practice earlier in the week. So it's a give and take from the program. Brent Key trusts us as members of the media, and we appreciate that being allowed in there, week in and week out to see what's going on.
So what would you say is the biggest difference between Pyron and King then?
Experience. Haynes King was at Texas A&M for 3 years, played a ton of football there, came to Georgia Tech in January of 23 and won the starting job in August of 23. And he started every game since, 20 games for the Yellow Jackets, has played almost every single snap. And I'd say probably 95% of the snaps he's been available since he stepped on campus for the Yellow Jackets. So I think that's what it comes down to. Again, Zach Pyron's played some football too. I think I tallied he's been in 16 games for Georgia Tech, but not, for a full 60 minutes, right?
Sure.
Except for that game at Virginia Tech in 2022. So if you look at it from that standpoint, if Zach Pyron were to play Saturday against Notre Dame, he's taken that first snap, he's taken that last snap. It's a massive crowd. It's a huge atmosphere. It's on ESPN against the number 12 team in the country. That's where the intangibles come in, right? So I think that would be one of the main differences. Outside of that, man, both kids run the ball extremely well. Haynes King maybe has a better arm slightly, but I mean, they were both recruited to Georgia Tech for a reason. They're both good quarterbacks, and I think the coaching staff firmly believes in Zach Pyron, and that's why he stuck around, even though he knew he wasn't going to be the starting quarterback going into this year.
All right. So I mean, it sounds like, and it just kind of looking at what he's done in the past, like you expect, like from a running standpoint, all those kind of things, probably not too much difference between the two.
Yeah, and I actually think I saw Marcus Freeman gave a quote on Monday to the same thing. Like their offense, really, Georgia Tech's offense, they're not going to go from throwing the ball 50 times a game to running it 50 times a game on Saturday against Notre Dame. No matter who the quarterback is, there's a lot of quarterback reads and some quarterback draws, a lot of short passes, a lot of screens, a lot of play action. They still want to run the ball with running back Jamal Haynes and run it effectively, have a great offensive line. So the quarterback is extremely important, but it's not the end-all be-all for this offense.
Well, I had to do a double take when I was looking. They've only given up 1 sack so far this year. I mean, is that you talked about the line? Is that mostly because of the line, or is it in combination with the fact that you do have a quarterback who can run out of some trouble?
It's a combination. I mean, Buster Faulkner, the offensive coordinator, and Chris Winkie, the quarterback's coach, they do a great job of getting the ball out. Georgia Tech has 2 great wide receivers, and Eric Singleton and Malik Rutherford. They have a great running back in Jamal Haynes and a veteran offensive line. 4 out of those 5 guys played on the team last year on the offensive front. So they do an outstanding job of protecting the quarterback, but also a ton of quick passes, ton of quick short passes, a lot of play action. And Haynes King is really, really smart at getting rid of the ball and not taking those sacks. And the only sack he took, he scrambled and got tackled for about a half-yard loss on that sack. So it's a combination of all the things, of everybody understanding in this offense how to get rid of the ball, how to not take those sacks, how to run with it, when you have to, calling design runs, keeping the defense off balance. And it's worked so far to fruition.
Jamal, Haynes, he's rushed for almost 300 yards in the last 2 games alone. And again, kind of looking at what he had done, he had been fairly average through the first 5 games of the season. How's this switch kind of flipped for him the last couple games?
Yeah, a big thing there for Jamal Haynes is the bye week. Georgia Tech played, what was it, 5 straight games to start the season with no break. And he was a little banged up coming out of fall camp. I don't know if it was a foot injury or an ankle injury or both. He clearly was not 100%. So that's number one. I think the bye week allowed him to kick that foot up, rest a little bit, get it 100% healthy, give him a little bit more confidence. Number two, Georgia Tech really hasn't had a true backup running back. Chad Alexander is probably the main guy. He's a former walk-on who's got a scholarship this season. Trey Cooley, who's a transfer originally from Louisville, has hardly played at all in his backup running back role. So a lot of defenses were saying, hey, if Jamal Haynes is in the backfield, he's probably getting the ball. And they've stuffed the box and they've stuffed the run and really shut him down. Now that Chad Alexander is back healthy as the backup running back, that's changed some things. Now that Georgia Tech has tweaked the offensive line a little bit in terms of, how they line up and who's where, that has helped as well. But the biggest thing is Jamal Haynes being healthy. And the kid is a fire plug. He's really tough. And if anybody didn't see that run against North Carolina, just one of the all-timers breaking a 68-yarder with 16 seconds left to win the game. Pretty remarkable stuff, and the kid is a really, really good running back.
When I was curious, I only got to see a little bit of their game against Louisville a few weeks back, and they ended up losing that game. I mean, King had his best passing game of the season just in terms of yardage, but they only scored 19 points in that game. I mean, did it just come down to the fact that they didn't run the ball well enough, or what do you, because they didn't turn the ball over a lot either?
Yeah, that was part of it. I think there was some extra things at play in that one. I mentioned them playing, 5 games in a row to start the year. Georgia Tech having to fly to Ireland and back, having to fly to Syracuse and back, having to go up to Louisville. And it was about 1,000 degrees that day in Louisville. I don't know if that's the official reading, but man, it was one of the hotter games I can ever remember. So not making excuses for the Yellow Jackets, but I think they were a little bit worn down. They gave up a defensive touchdown. They gave up a special teams touchdown on a block kick for a return for 6. You could just tell they were not on top of their game for whatever reason. And like we mentioned earlier, Louisville defensively did a great job of stuffing the run and daring Haynes King to pass, which he did. But when that offense is not balanced, when it's one-dimensional, like a lot of offenses, it's not going to be great. So I think that allowed Georgia Tech going into the bye week after that loss to Louisville say, okay, we can't let this happen anymore. Let's switch some things around on the offensive line, the way we're doing things. Let's develop our backup running backs a little bit more. Let's be a little bit more balanced on offense, and that showed in that Duke game and showed in that North Carolina game, and they've been rolling ever since.
Well, if I remember right, that was a noon game too, wasn't it?
Noon. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking that was one of those, I watched a little bit before I, went over to Notre Dame kind of thing,
Yeah.
Noon road games and all those kind of things. Those are, I think those are always a crapshoot no matter what. Defensively, they got a new defensive coordinator, obviously, this season. Tyler Santucci came over from Duke. He coached under Mike Elko, obviously, even going back to Texas A&M. How significant has that move been for them this season?
Huge. And, of course, ironically, Notre Dame faced Duke last year. And so
Right.
Tyler Santucci prepared for Notre Dame last year. I asked Brent Key about that this week, and he said that really isn't too big of a factor, really, either way. Georgia Tech also brought over Jess Simpson from the Duke staff to coach the defensive line. So those two combined have been huge. Georgia Tech's defense was really bad in 2023, especially against the pass, especially on third down. Could not really stop anybody. And you flip it over to 2024, one of the best rush defenses in the ACC, one of the better defenses in the entire conference overall. They're playing really, really good defense. They have a lot more depth. I don't think their talent level is where it needs to be by any stretch of the imagination. But again, that they have so much depth now compared to last year. They can rotate a lot of guys in. They're tackling a lot better. They're not getting a ton of sacks. They're not getting a ton of turnovers right now. But they're keeping guys off the scoreboard. Really, that's what it comes down to at the end of the game. At the end of the day, is keeping guys off the scoreboard. They've done a fantastic job of that. And the biggest thing is they've stopped the run week in and week out, and that's been really huge for them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, again, just looking at their numbers, those things stood out as well. Lack of sacks, lack of really forcing. Is it just kind of a scrappy? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a good word for it. And I think sort of their MO is, of course, they want sacks, right? And of course, they want takeaways. And they got 2 takeaways, at North Carolina. But the way this defensive line operates, it's more of a defensive line that sort of clogs the line of scrimmage, right? And lets the linebackers and DBs make some plays. So you don't have like an NFL-type pass rusher on this team. You don't really have a kid that's going to get back there and, get 10 to 15 sacks a season. They have a great defensive tackle in Jordan Vandenberg, who transferred from Penn State. But outside of that, it's by committee. They rotate, 6, 7, 8 guys in there playing and play out to try to stay fresh and neutralize the other team's offensive line. And so, yeah, there's not maybe a huge sack number, not a lot of tackles for loss, but those linebackers and DBs are in better position because there's not many people, to navigate through at the offensive line at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's sort of how they've understood that their identity is going to be this year, and they've taken it and run with it.
They did give up over 200 rushing yards to the Tar Heels last week in that game, and North Carolina quarterback Jacoby Criswell played a pretty good part in that. I think he had around 70 or so yards and a couple touchdowns on the ground. Like, is that do you see that mobile quarterback being a big factor potentially?
Yeah, it could be.
Rylie Leonard, obviously, this week.
Yeah, and they were also facing, Amari and Hampton, one of the best running backs in the country, who broke off a 70-yarder at one point and had another big gain that was called back for an offensive penalty on UNC. So there were some gaps there from that Georgia Tech run defense, really for the first time all year. The interesting thing about North Carolina and Jacoby Criswell, he's not necessarily known as a running quarterback, but he had some lanes, So I'll be interested to see if Notre Dame takes note of that and says, hey, look what Criswell did for UNC. Let's see if we can get Rylie out there. Interesting, again, that Tyler Santucci, the former defensive coordinator at Duke, obviously was on the same roster as Rylie Leonard, and now they have to go against each other on Saturday. I'm sure Tyler Santucci and his defensive staff are aware that could be an option with Rylie Leonard, that he's going to pull the ball down and run, and they'll have a game plan for it. Of course, the trick, right, is not selling out on stopping Rylie Leonard in the ground game and staying packed in the defensive secondary. So that'll be a huge issue for Georgia Tech to see if they can handle that for 4 quarters. Yeah,
and this is like going back to Notre Dame playing Texas A&M and Elko at the beginning of the season. So it's kind of the second time, that Notre Dame maybe has seen something along those lines. So it's going to be like just the sort of the chess pieces, I think, are going to be interesting to see how that lays out this Saturday.
For sure. Another, cool note about it is, Brent Key, his first game as a player, as a redshirt freshman, was at Notre Dame.
Oh, wow.
And so, there's a lot of connections between these two programs. And, these days, I think, us in the media, we make probably more about it. Like, this coach was here and that coach was there and that guy transferred to that school. But, rosters change and schemes change. And guys, like you mentioned, chess. I mean, guys are always moving pieces to try to find an edge there. I think I'm really fascinated to see what Tyler Santucci's defense does against Rylie Leonard and company.
Yeah, I mean, with the transfer portal now, I think it's going to be more rare that you don't kind of see familiar faces, I think, every year, just the way things have gone.
Yep.
All right, Chad Bishop from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, again, covering Georgia Tech as Notre Dame heads down to Atlanta this weekend to take on the Yellow Jackets. Chad, again, appreciate it. Great stuff. Thanks for doing this.
Bye.
The old mute button. I'm waiting for everyone to post in the chat that I had the mute button on, because I wasn't really saying anything. I was just moving my lips to see if everyone was paying attention. How you doing, Jesse? Jesse is here now.
I'm all right. I've been a little sick the last couple days, so
oh, here we go.
My voice is a little raspy.
You've been on the show once in like the last 3 weeks, and now you've got raspy throat.
I'm sick.
It's the changing of the weather, would be my guess.
Amongst other things.
Amongst other things. There has there's been a groundswell of whiteboard desire, I guess we should say.
Before we get into that, I just thought I caught some of the end of the Chad Bishop interview there.
Go ahead.
I just thought it was, he's the Georgia Tech fan base, and I'm going off of some of the stuff that Chad said there, seems to be really optimistic about Georgia Tech's run defense. And I just really liked the way you posed the question of, well, North Carolina had some success running the ball last week, and he almost got dismissive of being like, that was a really good running back. And it's like, okay, but have you seen what Notre Dame has done in the run game?
Or Jadarian Price? Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then he was like, he almost made it seem like, like if Riley Leonard runs, I have news for you, buddy. He has the most carries amongst anyone on the roster. He's going to run the ball. Like Riley Leonard is going to run the ball. Jeremiah Love is going to run the ball. Right. I don't know. It just felt very dismissive for something that's like, that's what Notre Dame does best. Like if you can expect anything, you can expect a heavy dose of the run. And I guarantee they're going to run the ball better than what North Carolina did.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, it's the best. This, regardless of what, some Notre Dame fans maybe think of this offense, it's probably the best offense, definitely the best running offense that Georgia Tech has seen to this point. So it's going to be a massive test for them.
So yeah, I just had to chuckle because I was like, dude, like they are going, it's not a matter of if they're going to run the ball, it's when. And it's a matter of, is Georgia Tech going to do anything to stop the run? You know what I mean? I don't know. I just felt just weird vibes. Like Riley Leonard is definitely going to run the ball, and he's going to run the ball probably at least 10 times, like he leads the team in carries. Like they're going to, and if Notre Dame saw a weakness with the North Carolina running back, like they got to be licking their lips being like, all right, well, we got a guy who can actually run the ball, like, I don't know. I just thought it was a very interesting dialogue. That's all.
All right. Good perspective. I guess I didn't look at it quite to that degree that you did, but I think you're probably right. And I think Michael is right as well. Georgia Tech is going to have to stack the line of scrimmage and dare Notre Dame to throw. But, like if you look at what Notre Dame did against Stanford with some of those RPOs, I think that a heavier dose of, a continued heavy dose of the RPOs can help take care of some of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this offense is kind of starting to get into where we thought they would be game 1 and game 2 of the season in terms of kind of designed runs, design RPO schemes that can come off of those design runs. Like everything in the Denbrock offense has layers, and you unlock a level and then you unlock the next layer or the next level that comes off of that base play. Right. And so I think we got, or maybe not even I got, maybe a little eager or anxious because I wanted all that stuff to kind of start, progressing game 2, 3 in the season, and they weren't there yet. And now I think you're starting to truly see, the different layers of this offense and how everything sort of builds off of each other.
Well, yeah. And this goes to what Michael is saying here. He says, well, our passing offense was decent last week. It still ranks low. I mean, it's never like, if you're going to look at the national rankings and see where Notre Dame stacks up, it's never going to rise that high in the national rankings. It's just not, because you're 6 games into the season at this point. As we started saying a few weeks back, the only thing you have to look at is what does it look like now, and is this week better than last week? That's what they have to keep. They have to keep stacking. And from Miami, they stacked, and it was better against Louisville. And from Louisville, they stacked, and it looked better last week against Stanford. Now, yeah, Stanford does not have a good pass defense, but Notre Dame took advantage of that, and they both ran the ball for over 200 yards against a team that wasn't giving up anything on the ground. And Riley Leonard also had his best passing game of the season. So really that's all I'm looking at. I'm not going to, again, like where Notre Dame stacks up in terms of national leaders in the passing game. If you're going to, base what you think of this offense and the passing offense off that, you're never going to be satisfied, just because they're never going to rise high enough based on where they came from at the start of the season. Can they be better week to week? That's the biggest question to me.
I mean, to me, to sum it up, like
I see what Michael is saying. He said he's looking at it from a Georgia Tech perspective. Like, if you're Georgia Tech and you're looking at those numbers, then yeah, you're not going to be impressed either. Pick your poison. Yeah.
Notre Dame's run attack is the base to their offense. The passing attack just needs to be enough to complement the passing game. When teams really want to overload and stack the box, you got to be able to hit some of those pass plays to kind of alleviate the pressure and hold those safeties kind of true to their depth, right? Like the more they creep down, the more you have to do to attack them vertically down the seams, really. So again, I have no problem with how Notre Dame scores their touchdowns and kind of the method of the madness. As long as they're moving the ball, the offense, the passing game just needs to do enough to alleviate that pressure for the run game. But the run game is going to be the majority of the offense going forward.
Jesse, this is all foreplay is what this is, because I've got people in here begging for the whiteboard. Are you going to satisfy them or not?
Yeah, I made sure and did some homework today.
Okay.
I like to look at common opponents, so I watched the Georgia Tech and Louisville game. I thought that was the most, most true, right?
I mean, it's sandwiched in between, basically. Yeah.
Right, and so I think it gives you a good basis or understanding, for how a team is going to perform to a degree when you look at common opponents. And that Georgia Tech and Louisville game was like a tied game going into the fourth quarter, and so. I don't think that this Georgia Tech game it's going to be a tough game. And I think if Notre Dame makes enough mistakes, in the special teams game or turnovers or pre-snap penalties, they could find themselves in a tough situation. But if they play how they're supposed to, they should take care of business against Georgia Tech. But Georgia Tech is going to present some difficult schemes on offense. They have a dynamic quarterback. They have a dynamic running back. And really the way I look at kind of how Georgia Tech operates is a lot how I thought Colin Klein and Connor Wigman would operate in that first game against Texas A&M. But we didn't necessarily see, Wigman do a lot of running the ball. But Georgia Tech's quarterback will run the ball. There will be design runs for him. And it's just a lot of, like I said, against Texas A&M, how they kind of get your eyes to go one way and then they kind of counter back the other way. That's a lot of what Georgia Tech's going to do. And so if I'm Notre Dame, this week the emphasis has to be for the linebackers just to trust what you're seeing, essentially, right?
Eye discipline.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of eye discipline, a lot of discipline in general. And the thing I'm looking at the most too is the Viper and defensive end spots, because those guys have to set the edge. They're going to be the read man. And when you're, getting into the number 2 and 3 strings, in terms of kind of depth chart from where they were at the beginning of the season, these guys have to be really disciplined and step up and be able to set the edge. And so that's the number one thing I'm looking forward to.
I mean, that was something Vince and I were talking about it earlier in the show. We were talking about, like, I felt like once, like, after that first drive that Stanford had that resulted in a touchdown, that's like you really started to see Cross and Mills start to chew some things up in the middle of that line. And when they were destructive in the middle and getting that pressure up the middle on Daniels, that's where it started. But I was also impressed, you talked about setting the edge. I was impressed with how, like, the discipline that the edge rushers for Notre Dame had in not running past Daniels and keeping him in that pocket and not letting him get back outside as a runner. What did you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's a lot easier for people like Mills and Cross when Notre Dame gets out to a big lead. You don't have to be as disciplined, and you can more so, especially as interior defensive linemen, just kind of pin your ears back and try to, create as much destruction as possible. And that's when Notre Dame can get into trouble. If this is a close game back and forth, that just requires more discipline because a team becomes, not as much one dimension team, right? The more you can stay a 2-dimension team and keep a team's true in terms of pass and run, then you're going to have more success. Stanford got a lot one-dimensional because they had to catch up. They were down 28-7, right? So the more that Georgia Tech keeps this game close, the more it keeps Notre Dame disciplined, especially amongst, a defensive line that's got a lot of injuries going on right now.
They're an interesting team because they don't force a lot of turnovers, but they also don't turn the ball over very much. There's not, the same with the sacks. They don't give up sacks, but they also don't get to the other quarterback a lot, so it's just really interesting looking at sort of the way they're built. To me, it all starts with their ability to run the football like that.
Yeah.
That's where it is. And that really sets things up even on the other side of the ball as well. If they're able to run the football effectively, they're going to be able to most likely stay in the game and have a fairly
that's the kryptonite to beating this Notre Dame defense is you have to be able to successfully maintain the run game. That's what NIU did. That's what Louisville did last year at Louisville in that game. The more a team can keep Notre Dame honest and run the ball, the harder. That's what's going to break that defense ultimately, right? But I think that I have more confidence now because of the progression that these linebackers have made. And I definitely think they, kind of learned from their prior mistakes at the beginning of the season. And it will be less about what Marcus Freeman called fit ball and just playing more natural football. I think they've kind of gotten that out of their system. And that goes back to just kind of trusting your instincts, right? Everything doesn't have to be this is what I see and this is how I fit it. Sometimes you just have to naturally go where your eyes take you at the end of the day, right? You always have to keep an eye. You have one eye on the lineman and you got one eye on who's got the ball. So if you go cross-eyed, that's on you.
I feel like I'm talking to Aaron Rodgers right now. Are you like ayahuasca, like doing your, just kind of mellow trip and, kind of come in, shooting the stuff?
It's all the sinus medicine I've been taking.
Are you just going to sit here and tease us the whole time? Are you going to break out the freaking whiteboard or what? What are you going to do here?
Yeah, I didn't know if we were ready. I was kind of setting the stage here.
I've asked you a few times if you're breaking out whiteboard. I don't know what you're doing.
Let me see. Hang on one second. I'm on a new setup.
Okay.
So bear with me here for a second. Can you see that?
I can. You want me to put it in?
Yeah, put it in because I can only see this screen now.
Okay.
So I'll just
go ahead and blow it up. I'm going to blow it up here. Take us out of the picture.
Here we go.
That's right, Joe. The stage has been set for 10 minutes.
How are we feeling? Can you see this okay?
Joe, the other Joe says Jesse makes us wait till the fourth date.
That's right. I don't give out the goods on the first date.
Oh, the Joes. The Joes are bringing the heat on Jesse. Yeah, I can see it extremely well. I see greens. I see blues. Let's make it happen. Let's go. Let's do this thing.
So this right now is 11 personnel, right? Ball is on the left hash.
We're looking at Georgia Tech offensively, correct?
Correct. And actually, I take that back. This is 12 personnel. They have one running back and two tight ends. I mean, one true tight end here on the end man of the line of scrimmage on the right side, and then more of like an H-back or fullback here, kind of split behind the left tackle on the left side. Okay. And then you have the running back is actually split out to the right here. And the quarterback is, in shotgun and the load man in the backfield, I guess you could say, right? But I really like this play because it goes back to, and this is stuff that Notre Dame has to keep an eye on. So they come out in this 12 personnel and their running back is split out in the slot. But immediately what they're going to do is they're going to motion this running back into the backfield. And then as soon as he's kind of stacked here on the up back, the H back behind the left tackle, they're going to snap the ball as soon as he's stacked here. And on the snap of the ball, the whole entire offensive line, including this tight end, are just going to block down or reach the guy to the left. So they're going to reach. And this tight end is just going to forego the last 2 men on the line of scrimmage. And his job is to get up to the second level and, wall off this linebacker. So everything's moving to the left. You have motion coming to the left. You have your offensive lineman blocking down to the left. But on the snap of the ball, that running back is going to put his foot in the ground. He's going to come back. Let me see if I can change the color here to make it a little bit better. He's going to come back to the right, and there's going to be a mesh with him and the quarterback, and they're going to fake a handoff. Well, in this situation, they do fake the handoff, but it's almost like, an RPO read. The quarterback can give the ball here, or he can pull it and keep it for himself. He fakes the handoff. This H-back is going to, come back to the right here. So, again, everything's blocking to the left, but he's going to pull off to the right here, and he's going to wall off the first end man on the line of scrimmage. Running back is going to take this fake dive, and he's going to try to also get out to the second end man on the line of scrimmage here. And the quarterback then keeps the ball and almost runs basically, a power scheme behind these two, your H-back and your running back that you just faked the dive to. So everything's flowing to the left. This guy comes in motion to the left on the snap of the ball. He puts his foot in the ground. He comes back right with this fullback, and they act as lead blockers here for the quarterback in a power scheme. So this is a play that I'd like to see, honestly, Rylie Leonard run, because it's a really good schematically drawn up play. And it's something that Notre Dame has to be.
And if you've got Jeremiah Love as a decoy.
Right. And that's the thing that Notre Dame has done really well, between Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, is they've established the run. And so when they're in the game, you don't know who they're going to give the ball to. They could give it to Love. Rylie Leonard could keep the ball. But, Jeremiah Love and Rylie Leonard have respectively ran the ball 65 and 63 times. And they're both averaging over 6.5 per carry, and they each have 8 or 6 touchdowns. So, it's almost like a pick your poison situation. But this quarterback for Georgia Tech can also run the ball very well. So it's something that Notre Dame has to be aware of. But luckily, they practice against Rylie Leonard all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And 2 weeks in a row that they've prepared for a guy who can take off and run with it. And I don't know if you heard, the early part of the interview with Chad Bishop that we just had. Haynes King, the starting quarterback, is day to day, and it's not known if he will play against Notre Dame Saturday. But the backup, Pyron is his name, Zach Pyron, is another mobile guy. So, the offense is not going to change much, if at all, if you go from one quarterback to the other. Both of them are going to have the threat of being able to keep the ball and run it. So I don't know if Pyron will be as dynamic. He is much less experienced than a Haynes King. So I think that is a potential factor, especially if you do make him have to start throwing the football, making some more decisions, if it's Pyron and not Haynes King out there.
All right. So that was one of 3. I have 2 more left. Let me see. Hopefully I can navigate to this next one. Which one do I want to do first? I'll do this one. So while I'm kind of get it all set up again, if you don't mind.
Here we go.
I'll try to get a view here that's as zoomed in as possible. I think this is the best it's going to get. So another common theme that I noticed when watching this Georgia Tech and Louisville game is Georgia Tech loves, and I think this is, it has to be by design. They love to spread things out. So right now you can see quarterback is an empty, and they have what I would call a diamond formation off to balls on the right hash. So to the field side, they have a diamond formation, right? So you have, basically 4 wide receivers lined up in a diamond, if you can picture that, right? And I think that they do this to give the quarterback 2 options. Really, what all they're doing here is they're spreading everyone out and letting this box be as empty as possible. And I think from there, they decide to let the quarterback, if he sees that he's got the numbers, he's just going to take the ball and run. And so I've seen this out of diamond, and I've seen this out of basically, two stacks where, there's two wide receivers stacked on these numbers and there's two wide receivers stacked out on these numbers. And again, it pulls those defensive backs all the way out there, and it lightens up the box a little bit, right? So if I'm Notre Dame and I'm some of these linebackers and I see, this diamond formation or a 2x2 stack where they're really pressing the numbers and trying to, stretch out the field, I would be alerting quarterback draw immediately because, again, the middle of the field in this picture is wide open. And that's exactly what Haynes, his name's Haynes King, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what he does here. These two outside wide receivers, they're going to, streak down they're going to streak here and just kind of clear this thing out. This point man on the diamond is going to, block off this corner. And then the back wide receiver in this diamond formation is going to fake a screen, right? So all these offensive linemen are showing pass protection, and they, this wide receiver shows screen, quarterback opens up, he fakes the screen, this way, and then all he's got to do is just pick a hole that he likes, and he's just going to run through it, more than likely get behind his guard that's, working up to the second level. And again, this is nothing crazy, but they got 20, 30 yards out of this quarterback run by just spreading everything out, snapping the ball, faking a screen, and allowing Haynes King to just kind of pick a hole that he likes and run through it, essentially. So this one's a little bit less, schematically, maybe impressive. But again, if you're a viewer at home this weekend and you see them go into this diamond quad or a stack 2x2, immediately kind of alert to yourself, all right, well, this is probably 50-50 chance of a quarterback draw here right through the middle of the defense.
Interesting. All right.
I saw it, and I saw him do it at least 2 or 3 times. One was out of this quad, and again, the other one was just like a 2x2 stack where they're both, essentially on the numbers. And again, all that does is it makes these because if these defensive backs and safeties and linebackers don't honor it, then all he's got to do is, flip that ball out to this wide receiver, and now it's an easy screenplay that's going for 10 yards. So, again, I think it's kind of built in. Whatever Haynes King sees, he's going to be the ultimate decider and say, all right, well, I'm either going to throw this thing or I'm just going to immediately run a quarterback draw.
Yeah. And, I mean, when you talk about that many receivers on the field as well, with the depth of Notre Dame's secondary right now, it's something to keep an eye on, I guess,
Mm-hmm. All right, let me see. I got one more. This one's a lot more fun. So let me find it here. Let me know when you've got it all worked up here.
There you go.
All right, so
a lot going on here.
Yeah, this is all right. So this is more kind of schematically impressive compared to what we just saw. So again, this is like a similar 12 personnel look that we did on that first play. You got balls in the middle of the field. You have a tight end to the left, and then you have an H-back also to the left, stacked behind the tight end. You have one wide receiver off to the left and two wide receivers off to the right. So the only person in the backfield at the snap of the ball is going to be the quarterback and that H-back. But again, this is a very similar scheme to the first play, and again, testing that eye discipline for Notre Dame players. What they're going to do is bring this kind of number 2 wide receiver here to the right side in motion. And if it's not in motion, he's very close to the line of scrimmage. So at the snap of the ball, they're bringing this guy in almost like a jet motion look. And the quarterback, again, is going to, essentially fake a handoff right here. And then your H-back and your tight end are going to be reaching here to kind of close off, the end man in the line of scrimmage, which would be the defensive end, and this outside linebacker. So, at the snap of the ball, both these guys are reaching off to the left. This wide receiver / running back is coming in jet motion. So everything looks like it's going to the left, right? And then all of a sudden, your left tackle and your left guard are going to be pulling kind of to the backside here. And again, the guard is going to hit this end man on the line of scrimmage. This left tackle is going to keep on going and work it up to the second level here, probably to the outside linebacker. So again, they're going to fake that handoff on the jet sweep. Everything looks like it's going to the left. Offensive linemen are going to the left. And now all of a sudden you have your backside guard and tackle who are going to be pulling towards where that jet motion came from. They're going to fake the handoff, and that quarterback again is just going to run behind his guard and tackle on a power scheme and try to get as much yards as possible. But this all works again because of showing motion one way and then pulling guys basically to the opposite direction and allowing the quarterback to make the decision of, do I hand it here on the jet sweep and let him try to secure the perimeter, or do I keep it myself and try to secure the perimeter on the opposite side of the field? So this is a really tough play, in my opinion, to defend because both perimeters are vulnerable, right? And so that's where I was talking about with these young defensive linemen, not young defensive linemen. I mean, some of them are, but maybe guys who you didn't expect to play as much at the beginning of the season, but are stepping up into big roles because of some injuries. They have to be really disciplined and setting the edge here and forcing things to kind of funnel back inside where the rest of the help is. You can't get beat on the outside by these wide receivers, and especially you can't get beat on the outside by this quarterback. So
that's the key to the whole thing is the defensive ends setting that edge and not falling for all this back and forth and all the motion and pulling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and not only the defensive ends, but really whoever the inside linebacker is, because he's going to be the help no matter what. Because, as you can see here, the outside linebackers are trying to get reached here by, a tight end, an H-back, or maybe a pulling guard or tackle. This linebacker, no matter what, is the overflow player, right? So if things funnel back inside, he's got to be here to clean it up or here to clean it up. Okay, maybe the play breaks to the outside. Well, now he's got to be the guy to come over the top on either side and kind of make the play. So I expect someone like Drake Bowen, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka, Bryce Young. Those guys are the guys that need to have big games of just containing this run, right? Like the defensive ends force everything inside. And if it's forced inside, then Drake Bowen's got to be there to clean it up. And then say maybe they break containment and things start going outside. Well, then it's Drake Bowen's job to chase this guy to the sideline and not allow him to turn the ball upfield.
So with all the eye candy, that we talk about with again, you've got, on this particular play, you've got the left guard and left tackle both pulling to the right. And then the other side of the line is down blocking to the left. So with all this stuff showing in different directions, what is the key read or reads for that middle linebacker to keep himself in position to make the right play?
Yeah, so immediately when this number 2 wide receiver goes in motion, the first thing that these linebackers are going to do are communicate or just kind of give, like an alert jet, right? So naturally their eyes and their steps at pre-snap are going to take them, this direction. But as I think I've kind of talked about this before, you still have to stay in phase. So as this guy is coming across your face, so let's say he ends up right here on the snap of the ball. It's the job of this linebacker to stay on this inside shoulder of the runner, right? So if he does give him the ball, he still has the leverage to come downhill and make this tackle wherever it happens to be, right? But say he fakes that handoff, he cannot be and that's the thing is if they follow this thing so much, let me get rid of this line, so much so that why won't it let me grab this guy? Hang on one second. At the snap of the ball, maybe say he's over pursued, right? That's where you get in trouble. So if you're on this kind of field side shoulder and they fake that handoff, well, now you've got to cover ground all the way back this way to try to make that tackle. So that's why it's important to stay on that upfield shoulder because it gives you the opportunity to make a play on the jet. And if they fake that, it's okay. Well, now I can recover and come back and make it over here. So when I see alert jet, I'm naturally kind of, flowing this way a little bit, couple steps, kind of working downhill. But immediately what you see as the linebacker is you're taught to read your triangle. So let me try to pick a different color here where I can draw in a triangle. Your triangle as the linebacker is going to be Something along the lines of this. This is your triangle that you're reading, center guard kind of tackle area, right? So snap of the ball, yeah, you see that jet man going, but you also got to see what's right in front of you. And what's right in front of you is a guard and left tackle pulling. So you're like, all right, well, if those guys are pulling and I see a fake handoff, now immediately it's kind of, let's abandon that and start again slow meshing, reading this direction with the quarterback. And again, it's that same concept. If you're the linebacker, you don't want to go past this kind of shoulder right here, because the more you over pursue, say you get on this kind of outside shoulder of the quarterback, well, then that allows the quarterback to hit some sort of cutback lane, right? So like everything is just staying in phase until you've diagnosed it, and then you get downhill and attack. As soon as you've kind of made that declaration of, all right, I know what's happening. These guys are pulling. I need to get downhill and go make a play.
All right.
I liked that one.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to that as well, but I think that's kind of, like when you look at this one specifically, it seems like there's like, that's kind of one of the foundations that Georgia Tech kind of runs its offense off of, right?
Yeah, and again, this is kind of the stuff I anticipated more out of Texas A&M, but I just don't know if Colin Klein trusted Weigman yet. I don't know if his legs were as potent as someone like Haynes King, but this is the type of stuff that I think a lot of offensive coordinators are getting into, is showing you motion one way and then coming back the other way.
What's your confidence in Notre Dame's linebackers and defensive ends going up against this?
I mean, they've been pretty solid in the run so far. And I would say that I would be more concerned with Georgia Tech's running game than I would their passing game. So I would give it a solid 7 or 8 out of 10. I mean, the quarterback and running back are still dynamic playmakers. And I don't think Notre Dame is going to be perfect. I think Georgia Tech is going to hit some, some big plays, which I would consider 10+ yard runs. They might have a few of those, but at the end of the day, this defense is so good about bending but not breaking. And so I don't think Georgia Tech might get down in the red zone, but I don't see them being able to punch the ball in those kind of last 20 yards, really. I think it's a lot of Notre Dame maybe giving up, a lot of rushing yards up front, but then kind of buckling down on the red zone and forcing some field goals.
All right. Sounds good. A good return, a great return of the whiteboard tonight. People have been waiting for it for a long time to consume the whiteboard, and they ate it up.
There hasn't been a comment in the chat for 20 minutes.
I was going to say, you can always tell when the attention is very rapt because they stopped chatting. So the chat went silent. There were crickets from the chat there for a while. Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do it.
Scale of 1 to 10. What's your confidence in Rylie Leonard right now?
My confidence in Rylie Leonard is a solid 8 out of 10. I don't think he's the absolute best quarterback in the country, and I don't think he's the worst quarterback in the country, but I think he gives you a chance with how dynamic his legs are. He still has 8 rushing touchdowns. He has over 400 rushing yards. Again, I don't care how your production looks. I just care about the end result, in a matter of, can he still score touchdowns and get first downs? And I've seen a good progression from Rylie Leonard, not only in his passing game, but also in his run game since the beginning of the season. So I put my number at a solid 8 out of 10. And I think he is going to be the difference maker in some of these maybe closer games coming up.
So we've got a pretty good range here so far. Yours is 8, Connor is 7, John is 10, and I'm going to give a new number. I'm going to go with a 9. Mine is still very high, but it's a 9. I mean, when you look at, again, this is a progression of this offense, and the offense has really, I think, turned a corner. And when you look at Rylie Leonard and you listen to Rylie Leonard after the game the other night, there just seemed to be a different vibe to him, like a different level of confidence that he had. And like when you look at the way he led the offense Saturday against Stanford and, kind of combine it with that vibe, and hearing the things that he's talking about, getting on the same page with Mike Denbrock, like it is there. And he led them to 6 touchdown drives the other day against Stanford and had probably his best passing game of the season. And, you know, again, it's not just about what he looks like as a passer. Finally got over 200 yards, but he had 3 touchdown passes and 4 total touchdowns, you know, that he had, with the rushing touchdown that he had as well. And it's just starting to look a lot. I really like that heavier dose of RPOs and what that did for him. And, you know, again, like when you look at what Stanford tried to do, stack up, stop the run, I think we'll see more of that from Georgia Tech. We'll probably see more of that from everybody, you know, as this season goes on. And if he continues to show that he can beat it with some of those passes like he did the other day, I think it's going to go a long way for the Irish. And I just think it's going to continue to get better. So my confidence right now in Leonard is 9. Fill in the blank. The thing that impresses you the most about the Notre Dame defense right now is blank.
It's overall depth or the ability to be next man up. I thought that, you know, outside of linebacker, the defensive line, the secondary, they've all kind of taken hits, but it's always the next man up, and no one's afraid. And I don't feel like I've seen a drop off between the second and third, and now maybe even the 4th string in some of these guys. So, you know, it's all fine and dandy to be a defense that is, you know, really good at the 1s and 2s, but when things kind of go, when stuff hits the fan, or, you know, when crap hits the fan, how do you respond to that? And again, I don't feel like I've seen a real drop off where I'm like, dang, that guy's a liability because he's filling in for a guy that's potentially gotten hurt, right? And if we're being honest, I love to make these kind of connections and parallels. It's the opposite of what we've seen out of the Dallas Cowboys defense, a defense that just looks, I mean, they looked bad in general, but they looked even worse when guys were hurt this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, you're teeing it up for DK right now, but you'll have your chance to tee off on the Cowboys here in a minute. I agree with you on the depth. Like the depth, the fact that they have been able to continue to play at an elite level in spite of the, you know, the people who they have lost. I mean, Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore, the sack leaders, but then you get a guy like Burnham back, and you get the emergence of guys like Bryce Young and Josh
Leonard
Burnham.
Moore.
And yeah, I mean, like they continue to get that. Yeah. And then now Leonard Moore, and what you're going to have to rely on Leonard Moore for. So like the depth and the fact that they've continued to play at that level despite all those losses has been really amazing. If I dig a little bit deeper though, they've allowed a total of 27 points in the second half this season. 27 points. That's 4.5 points a game they're allowing in the second half this season. And so on top of, you know, that depth that you're talking about, is they get better as the game goes on. And that, you know, like that's an elite.
It's all fun
defense.
and games until Al Golden figures you out.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's what has happened.
He's like it's kind of like he's doing a mental Rubik's Cube on the sideline throughout the first and second quarter. And then he finally solves that sucker and he's like, you guys are done. You know, the fun is over, right? And like that's what it was. You know, everyone can have a scripted first drive of plays you've not shown, plays you want to run, that sort of stuff that kind of.
And then Al Golden punches you in the face.
He's like, all right, that's cute, but here's how we're going to counter that.
Right.
And then teams kind of have to go back into more of their base offense. And he's like, well, that's what we've been prepping for all week. So you're really not going to get anything done with that. So, yeah, I mean, it's all teams, smart teams come out. And especially when you're playing, you know, teams like Notre Dame, you know, ranked top 25, top 20, top 10 teams, you got to start doing stuff outside of the box that you haven't shown to kind of throw off the defense. But like you said, Notre Dame is good about throwing that counter punch once they kind of figure you out after those first couple drives.
Yep, that's exactly right. Going back to the Rylie Leonard talk, Joe asked, what made Leonard finally not be scared to throw? What do you think about that?
I think what made Riley Leonard finally not scared to throw was just overall having the confidence to throw the ball, to be more comfortable in the scheme and kind of learning how things build off of one another, right? And so I think when teams start to naturally creep towards the box, it makes his job a lot easier because he gets a lot of more single high, man-on-man coverage. And so I think it just took him getting comfortable, in his own body, essentially, right? Like we still had to remember Riley Leonard was a transfer quarterback, new offense, new team, new wide receivers, coming off injury. And I think that the anticipation was everything's going to be great game one. But I don't think Riley Leonard was necessarily 100% ready for that, right? And so now he's kind of settled in, gotten comfortable, and he just trusts himself more. He looks like a guy who is just, really confident in himself at the end of the day.
And I think that is it. I think you said comfort a few times in there. And I think that it all boils down to that, the comfort that he has, like Michael said, watching film. And I think that there's obviously some of that. We played the cut from Riley Leonard from after the game the other day, talking about, hey, his rapport with the wide receivers. And it's like, he said himself, those guys have been open a lot. I just wasn't throwing to them. And I think that between watching the film and realizing those plays were there for him to make if he trusted it a little bit more, and just continuing to get on the same page with Mike Denbrock has all funneled him in this direction. Look, how many times did I say it those first few games when it wasn't there, that if you look back at his 2022 season, this was not a quarterback who wasn't throwing the football before. The guy had 20 touchdown passes that year. And, again, threw for almost 3,000 yards that year. This is a guy who's thrown the football before. It just took a little bit more time than any of us thought, including himself, I think, but not Mike Denbrock, because, again, if you listen to Mike Denbrock back in fall camp, he told us this offense was going to be different by this point in the season than it was at the start of the season. I think that all these things have just finally meshed, and we're just seeing a lot more confident and comfortable quarterback out there. I think that that's a huge, huge part of it. Just the probably the comfort that comes with that confidence, and vice versa. Jeremiah Love gave his gloves to a kid in the stands at the end of the game today. You had a similar experience when you were a young lad out there at Notre Dame Stadium.
Yeah, so I was always fortunate, when you and Vince would do, be up in the press box. Those press box passes would allow you to be on the field for the last 5 minutes, and you can kind of walk, with at the end of the game with the players and through the tunnel and all that stuff. So every now and then I was able to do that, but every time I was on the field, I was always so starstruck and wanted some gloves from some players. So I had no shame in walking up to the players and being like, hey, can I have your gloves? And at the time I was, just a little pipsqueak kid. So they never, thought of anything of it. But it's crazy because I saw this question and I've been thinking about it all day, but I can't even remember who the person was that actually gave me their glove.
You can't even remember now?
No, I can remember. I remember exactly what the glove looks like, but I can't remember who.
But you can't remember the player?
Yes.
I thought it was it Brandon Hoyt? Does that sound right? One of the linebackers? Or was it a running back?
I thought it was a running back, but I couldn't think of their name. And for the longest time, I always wanted to get one off of Tom Zbikowski, but he would never give it to me because a lot of times what happening is they're walking through the tunnel and they're just taking it off and throwing it. And they're not really listening or they're just kind of in their own world, but they're not looking at who they're throwing stuff to. They're just taking it off one by one and kind of throwing it into the crowd. But I do remember, and the reason it was an all gray glove, and the glove, and then the sticky part was also gray because that was back when they were Adidas, and they were always wearing those simple, just kind of all gray type gloves. But I mean, I didn't necessarily beg for gloves, but I would ask, and then again, most of the time they wouldn't hear you or they wouldn't really acknowledge you, and they just kind of keep going, right? But every now and then I would kind of get their attention.
Good start. All right. Fill in the blank. Notre Dame women's basketball being ranked number 6 in the AP preseason poll is blank.
It's exciting to me. And you know, whether or not you want to say they should be higher or they should be lower, you know, that's kind of your opinion. I've said it before how I feel about, you know, the preseason polls. I like to see teams play before we start giving out, you know, these rankings. But I think what you have to do is kind of observe who's in front of Notre Dame right now. There's South Carolina, Connecticut, USC, Texas, and UCLA. Those were all, you know, really solid programs from last season. And again, I think Notre Dame is fairly placed because they did go through a lot of injuries last season, and they did have a lot of success despite those injuries. But now the counter to that is, well, look what they've done in the transfer portal. Look who they're getting back in terms of, you know, coming off recovery and injuries and those sort of things. So the thing about the Notre Dame team is they just kind of have to prove it, right? Because all these pieces are now kind of coming together, and on paper you're supposed to be better than what you did last season, but can you actually go out there and do it? So that's what's exciting to me is I think Notre Dame has a great opportunity ahead of them. And I think if, you know, they do what they're supposed to, they could end up being one of those, you know, number 1 seeds come tournament time at the end of the season.
Yeah, this is the highest preseason ranking. This is year 5 for Niele Ivey. This is her highest preseason ranking. It's also number 6 is the highest preseason ranking since the year after Notre Dame won its national championship in 2018. They were the number 1 ranked team going in to the next season. And of course, they ended up being the national runner-up that following season, losing a close national championship game. So a lot of preseason buildup. And also, while we were doing this show, the ACC announced the preseason women's basketball rankings, as well as the preseason ACC team. Hannah Hidalgo is the preseason player of the year. She got 62 out of 79 first place votes. Tanaya Latson of Florida State was the preseason runner-up for player of the year. But Olivia Miles and Sonia Citron also on the preseason All-ACC team. And on the newcomer watch list, there were only 5 players named to the preseason watch list. Kate Koval and Liza Carlin both got that. And Notre Dame was also picked in the preseason poll to win the ACC. They got 70 of 79 first place votes going into the season. North Carolina State, which of course went to the Final Four last year, was the number 2 team in the preseason poll. So a lot of excitement for Notre Dame coming into this season, a lot of expectations and, getting all the preseason stuff. But now's where you go to work, because the preseason polls and rankings and all that stuff are nice, but there's a lot to come and a lot of excitement because of the fact that when you look at the preseason, like the AP national ranking, South Carolina, defending national champ, they're number 1 in the poll, in the preseason poll for the 6th straight year. But UConn is number 2, USC is number 3, Texas is number 4. And guess what? Notre Dame plays all 3 of those teams, UConn, USC, and Texas, and they get UConn and Texas at home. So big chance in November and December to really prove themselves against some of the top elite competition coming into this season. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're only 15 days away from the first exhibition game and 19 days away, or is it 20 days away, November 4th, whatever that is, from the season opener. So it's not going to be long, less than 3 weeks. The season's going to open. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be here before you know it.
Yep, absolutely. New York Jets traded for Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams today. Do you buy or sell Adams making a difference?
I sell that. I just really haven't been impressed with, 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers. The lack of kind of productivity amongst the offense. I mean, they have a top-end wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. They have a top-end running back in Breece Hall. They kind of fortified that offensive line. I think the difference maker is what Aaron Rodgers kind of has or hasn't done as a quarterback. And so, if his excuse is, I need another playmaker at the wide receiver position, and and yada, yada, yada. I just think that what this does is doubles down on the expectations of Aaron Rodgers. I mean, this season to me comes down to whether or not he is going to put them over the top. And I thought that the firing of Robert Saleh was unjustified. I didn't think he was necessarily the problem.
Unjustified.
But it's very clear that for some reason, this is kind of the manipulation that I think that comes along with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's manipulated them to get rid of Saleh. He's manipulated them into going out and getting Davante Adams. So to me, again, this comes down to Rodgers has to double down and really start to play better at the quarterback position.
And I mean, it's not just him because, all the things that you mentioned there, I don't think Davante Adams is going to make it, now, like, does it make things, does it open up the offense more? Sure, because now you can't double team Garrett Wilson all the time. Okay, fine. But Rodgers has been sacked 16 times already. The offensive line is still not good. As Michael Hahn said, guys, it's the Jets. And I mean, that's the answer right now. Their defense is not bad, but Aaron Rodgers himself, as a 40-year-old quarterback, has not looked good. Like his ability to get the ball downfield is not that good. So I don't think it's going to make a difference either. I guess we'll see. I mean, I think the biggest thing is Tua going to be back for the Dolphins? Because in terms of that division, it's the Bills, I think, and everybody else right now. So I guess they've at least got a chance as a wild card, but I just don't see it making that big a difference. It was kind of fun because I turned on the McAfee show today, and McAfee started off the show by asking Rodgers about the trade, and guess who peeked in right behind Aaron Rodgers?
Davante Adams.
His old buddy, Davante Adams, was right there with him. So that was kind of fun to see that,
Listen,
they obviously wanted to be back together, so they got their wish.
I am more excited for the fantasy implications because I have Davante Adams, and he's been out the last few weeks because he simply just didn't want to play for the Raiders. And so now having him back as a functioning wide receiver is something I'm looking forward to in one of my fantasy leagues.
Fill in the blank. Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni jawing with fans in the stands Sunday is blank. I saved this just for you. I didn't ask Vince this yesterday.
Yeah, so Nick Sirianni jawing with fans in his own fans, fans in the stands.
Eagles fans. Yep.
It's just so childish and arrogant and self-centered. And again, when we talked about Robert Saleh getting fired last week, I believe, you asked me who are some of those coaches that are on the hot seat. Nick Sirianni is definitely one of them, and I think he's starting to feel it because he feels the need to go back and forth with fans at this point, right? Like, why don't you just worry about X's and O's, coaching your team and producing wins, and not barely squeaking out a win against the crappy Browns? And that's unfortunately what this comes down to is the Eagles are underachieving. They're barely beating some of these bad teams. They have a good roster. And again, Nick Sirianni is underachieving as a head coach. And I think he's starting to feel that heat a little bit, right? And so when the fans start giving it to you, you only respond if some of that stuff hits home. And I think that Nick Sirianni is really starting to feel it.
Yeah, I mean, like you talk about rabbit ears. Like if you're coaching in Philly and your rabbit ears are so big that you feel like you've got to respond to any of that. And he tried to play it off like he was joking around and giving it back to him and whatever. Like whatever you think of Robert Saleh is still the adult in the room, and Nick Sirianni will always be the kid in the room. I don't care who you are as a coach. Like think about basketball coaches when the crowds are on top of you the way you are. You just can't start mixing it up with the fans. You've just got, like, if you're hearing that, your attention is in the wrong place to begin with, like what you're paying attention to. And Sirianni has always been quite a bit of a nut job to me. And that just highlighted it for me, like whatever you think of the buzzed head and everything else that he decided to do for that game, and Eagles, like Philly fans they're always, I don't want to say the worst, but just like in terms of like getting on anybody, whether it's, your team, the opposing team, whatever, like they're always going to be some of the loudest and the most obnoxious. And if you're the coach in Philly and you're responding to it now, like you don't belong there, because it's obviously gotten to you. So I don't know where else to go with that. Buy or sell Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, sticking with Mike McCarthy as head coach.
Is there a "it doesn't really matter" response that I can just insert? I mean, because really it doesn't matter if you fire Mike McCarthy now, if you fire him at the end of the season. It's just the same old rinse, lather, and repeat, right? And I don't know if you saw this today, but I listened to Jerry Jones.
I listened to the whole crazy interview, and then I listened to the response that the guys on the radio show had to the interview.
So here's what's going on. Jerry Jones does this little, daily, or not daily. He does this radio segment after each Cowboys game, and rightfully so, the guys who host this show asked Jerry Jones, "Hey Jerry, why didn't you make more moves in the offseason or spend more money in the offseason when there were glaring holes on offense and defense?" And Jerry Jones pushed back and said, "Well, why are you questioning me? I can replace you and ask someone who's going to ask me real questions," essentially, right? And so if that doesn't sum up the last 10 years of the Cowboys, I don't know what does. Jerry Jones thinks he's, this great architect of putting these rosters together. And then as soon as you question him about these rosters he's put together, his ego gets, all
and
crushed.
He wants to make everything about, because like going to the all-in comments in the offseason, he wants to make everything about, we had to sign Dak and we had to sign CD, where you're still $24 million under the salary cap, even after making those moves. And, obviously you got Micah Parsons coming up, next off season or whatever, but it was just a poorly constructed team to begin with. They needed to get a running back. They didn't get a running back. Instead of drafting a young running back in the 3rd round, they drafted Maris Liufau. And now Maris has not played poorly, but their defense can't stop the run. His level of play has not justified taking him in the 3rd round when you needed a running back, and you could have probably waited until the 5th round to come back and get Maris. Like, they didn't address an immediate need, and they're still horrible at running back. They can't run the ball, and the biggest problem is they can't run the ball. They can't stop the run. They're soft on both sides. And like, if you're that soft, it goes to the head coach. I agree. Like with what you're saying, the way this team is built is a complete reflection of Jerry Jones. But if you go back to the way they lost that game to the Green Bay Packers by getting gouged in the running game, like, the way the Cowboys are built is they have to be in a game, like within a touchdown one way or another. As soon as they relinquish the lead by a couple of scores, the other team is going to start running the ball. Micah Parsons, obviously he's not healthy right now, but even when he is, he doesn't want to play the run. He just wants to rush the quarterback and get stats so he can go, get sack numbers and get the big contract next year. But as soon as they do that, Dallas already can't run the football. Now they've got to start throwing the football more. The pass rush can consume Dak Prescott. They're just not built to compete on either side.
I mean, they're not really built to do anything right now.
But that's,
they have a bad defense.
Again, the roster,
offensive line, no running back.
Yeah, like the roster is the responsibility of Jerry Jones, but the toughness that this team does not display is a direct reflection of the head coach. And it's the same thing that we saw at the end of the season in the playoffs against the Packers. That's exactly how they've been bludgeoned in these home games to start this season.
Yeah. It's
tough.
tough.
And Zach Martin, like Michael Hahn is saying, even Zach Martin wasn't that good. I mean, he is playing through some injury, which he's done over the course of his career, but he is for the first time really looking frustrated out there, because there's just not that much around him. They've wasted a Hall of Fame career with Zach Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've wasted a good amount of careers over the last 10 to 15 years for guys who could have been better, who could have helped them win championships. But it just, It's such a poor reflection to me on Jerry Jones when you make yourself owner, president, and GM, and then when you're questioned over your GM moves, your immediate response is to fire the guy that's asking you that question and replace him with someone that's going to ask him a question that he wants to hear. That's the extremely frustrating part, because Jerry, if you want those responsibilities and you think you're so great to make those decisions, then you should be able to be questioned about those decisions when they're not panning out. And not only are they not panning out, they're getting absolutely destroyed.
Yeah. Rabbit Now Chihuahua says, as a Cowboys fan, I find myself saying serenity now when I watch them. How long until Jerry sells the team? He'll never sell the team. I mean, the only thing that's going to happen is he'll die, and then Stephen Jones inherits the team. And the question is, will things change once Stephen owns the team? Because that's what's happened. They're never going to sell that team, but it comes back to, and I think the guys on the radio show said this, and we've talked about it before as well. There's no accountability for Jerry Jones, because when Jerry Jones, the owner, is also Jerry Jones, the general manager, there's no pressure on him to make the right decisions, because he's never going to fire himself. He's never going to demote himself as the general manager. All he does is double down. And that's why the roster is in the shape that he's in, because he is so in love with his own draft picks. That's who he reinvests the money in, and he will not go outside and make legitimate free agent signings. He is always looking for goodwill bargain basement signs when it comes to free agency. That's all that he wants to do. And again, that's why the roster's in the shape that it's in right now. Offenses, they're just soft on both sides of the ball. So you're right. How much would firing Mike McCarthy actually do? I don't know, but it's not going to get any better. To me, it's not quite as bad as Wade Phillips in 2010, but it's not that much better right now, the way this season is going to play out. They haven't won at home. They've been beaten up in every game at home. And all they can rely on is when they go up against a team like the Giants. No offense, Michael, but the Giants are the Giants. Even the Commanders, the Commanders are probably going to smack them around in 2 games this season. And if you go back, I think you and I have talked about it before. If you go back to the end of last season, they ended up putting the blame on Dan Quinn after 2 off seasons in a row. Jerry gave Dan Quinn raises so he wouldn't go out and be a head coach. They should have just made Dan Quinn the head coach. They probably have Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach right now. Think about how different things would look if you had that combination instead of Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer and, all these other putzes that they've still got hanging around, So Jerry Jones, again, he kept Dan Quinn from leaving for a couple of years. Now he's got to deal with him in the same division because he held on to him and then ultimately made him the scapegoat for how bad things looked at the end of last season. That's where they are right now.
Yeah, I mean, Mike McCarthy's window should have been closed after the Packers game last season. But I digress. Dan Quinn is someone that players want to play for. He has discipline. There's just a lot more to be excited about with Dan Quinn than Mike McCarthy. But again, it's just all the puppet show at the end of the day. When it's the top down, I don't think it really matters who's in between Jerry Jones and the roster, coaching the roster.
Yeah. I was saying it last week, if you thought that Notre Dame's offense had issues, just watch a Dallas Cowboys game, because all you're hoping for is field goals. I mean, that's what everything ends in, is a field goal at this point. Their only bright spot is Brandon Aubrey, the guy who never played football at Notre Dame, who's just booming field goals left and right for the Cowboys. But that offense is completely stagnant right now too. And that's what Mike McCarthy is supposed to be in charge of. It doesn't look anything like what it looked like last year. I don't know why he's pulled the reins back. Everything, it looks more to me like a Kellen Moore offense from a couple of years ago. There's no flow. It's stagnant. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. Everything's on Dak Prescott to be perfect.
Yeah, he's got to make the perfect window throws.
Yep. All right. Well, that's our Cowboys rant for the week. We saved it for the end of Rapid Fire. Jesse, great whiteboard tonight. Great to have you back with the whiteboard. You'll be here Thursday as well, correct?
Yes, I will be here Thursday.
All right. Looking forward to that. Jonathan, they completely need a roster. is what they need. All right, hit that like button before you leave. Appreciate you being here tonight. Again, a lot of great stuff. We will be back tomorrow, and we will talk to you then on IB Nation Sports Talk.